Today, we follow what happens when arrogant women try climbing the death zone on Everest. From a summit push driven by legal pressure and brand ambition on the South Col to a storm-trapped ridge attempt where confidence replaced caution on unstable terrain. The consequences were so preventable and so devastating that witnesses were deeply shaken. It was May 14, 2015, on the northeast ridge of Mount Everest. High winds drove snow across the upper slopes, cutting visibility to a narrow white blur. Above 26,000 feet in the death zone, oxygen is scarce and the body begins to fail. Judgment declines, strength fades, and small mistakes quickly become fatal. Dithwan, 28, is a lifestyle blogger from Denver who has built a following around curated images of wellness and adventure. Her high-altitude resume was limited to several climbs in Colorado, none approaching Himalayan conditions. Despite recommendations from experienced climbers to gain further altitude training, she joined a commercial expedition on Everest's north side. She framed the climb publicly as the next step in her brand, presenting confidence that exceeded her experience. From the outset, guides noted her resistance to instruction. Acclimatization rotations were treated as inconveniences rather than essential preparation. Safety briefings were shortened in her retelling to followers. She spoke frequently about proving critics wrong and reaching the summit within a specific time frame. The climb had become a personal milestone tied to visibility and validation. That morning, base camp forecasts warned of strengthening afternoon winds and a narrowing summit window. Several teams adjusted their plans accordingly. As climbers moved higher along the ridge, gusts intensified and spindrift obscured the fixed lines. Progress slowed across the mountain. Near the upper ridge, Bethany's pace became inconsistent. She paused frequently and showed early signs of altitude stress, including imbalance and delayed responses. Her Sherpa guide, Pemba, advised turning back before entering the most exposed section of the route. The recommendation followed standard high-altitude protocol. When symptoms appear and weather declines, descent preserves life. She rejected the advice. Having invested heavily in the expedition and publicly committed to summiting that season, she viewed retreat as unacceptable. The summit objective outweighed the risk assessment presented by her guide. When Pemba refused to continue upward under those conditions, she proceeded alone along the fixed rope. At extreme altitude, independence is not a virtue. It removes the redundancy that protects climbers from error. Oxygen systems must be monitored constantly. Regulators can freeze or clog in severe cold, and subtle flow reductions can accelerate hypoxia. Above the ridge crest, her oxygen delivery became unstable. Later inspection suggested the regulator had partially malfunctioned. Rather than descending to troubleshoot at lower altitude, she continued climbing. The decision reflected a pattern established earlier in the expedition. Warnings were interpreted as obstacles rather than safeguards. Without adequate oxygen, the brain begins to swell. High-altitude cerebral edema impairs coordination and judgment. Headache intensifies, balance falters, confusion sets in. These symptoms demand immediate descent. Descending climbers later reported seeing her movements become erratic near a narrow stretch of the ridge. While still clipped to the fixed line, she collapsed. The fall pulled her backward off the packed track, and she slid down the slope until the rope caught against an icy outcrop, stopping further descent but leaving her suspended against the face. The abrupt arrest likely caused severe spinal trauma. Combined with oxygen deprivation and sub-zero temperatures, her physiological condition deteriorated rapidly. At that elevation, unconsciousness can occur quickly once oxygen supply fails. Core temperature drops, circulation weakens. Recovery without immediate assistance becomes unlikely. Pemba encountered her during his descent and radioed base camp. Weather interference delayed communication. By the time additional climbers reached the location, she was unresponsive. Helicopter evacuation was not possible at that altitude in high winds. Recovery was deferred until conditions stabilized. Several days later, her body was brought down. The official findings listed cerebral edema, complicated by hypothermia and traumatic spinal injury, as the cause of death. Examination of her equipment confirmed that her oxygen system had not been functioning adequately for a significant period before her collapse. Within the climbing community, the incident was discussed not as an unavoidable tragedy, but as a preventable one. Experience at extreme altitude requires humility and adherence to guidance. On Everest, confidence unsupported by preparation narrows the margin for survival. In the death zone, arrogance is not simply a personality trait, it is a risk factor. It was April 22, 2016, on the south col route of Mount Everest. The jet stream had dropped to summit level, bringing violent winds to the upper ridge. The death zone, exposure is measured in minutes, and in such winds even standing becomes dangerous. Praiselle Villain was 34, a pharmaceutical executive from Boston with no prior experience above moderate altitude. Her climbing background consisted of a brief mountaineering course and indoor rock climbing sessions. Despite recommendations to build experience on lower Himalayan peaks, she booked an Everest expedition with a budget outfitter, prioritizing cost and summit guarantees over preparation. She had already secured interest from a publisher for a book centered on the promise of reaching the summit through determination alone. From the beginning of the expedition, guides noted her resistance to standard protocol. Acclimatization schedules were treated as formalities. Equipment checks were rushed. Weather briefings were questioned. She frequently emphasized that her success was non-negotiable, framing obstacles as administrative barriers rather than environmental realities. On summit night, meteorological updates confirmed the jet stream would descend earlier than forecast. High winds were expected to make the upper sections of the route unstable. The expedition leader recommended aborting the attempt from Camp 4, citing wind speeds and the risk of oxygen depletion during delays near the summit. Praiselle reacted with open hostility to the recommendation. She argued that the decision reflected excessive caution rather than objective risk. When told the team would descend, she threatened legal action and insisted on continuing. Two other inexperienced climbers followed her lead. A Sherpa guide, under financial pressure, agreed to accompany them despite reservations. As they ascended, radio reports from descending climbers described worsening visibility and violent crosswinds above the south summit. Progress slowed across the mountain. Oxygen consumption rates increased as climbers struggled against the wind. Praiselle's breathing rate rose significantly due to poor acclimatization, but she dismissed concerns raised by her guide. Near the Hillary Step, a technical rock and ice feature just below the summit, a long queue of climbers formed along the fixed lines. Waiting at that altitude drains oxygen reserves and increases frostbite risk. Wind gusts made footing unstable. Instead of accepting the delay, Praiselle attempted to bypass the line by traversing toward an adjacent ice formation. The alternative path was visibly unstable. Temperature fluctuations and sustained wind loading had fractured the surface. Experienced climbers remained on the established route, recognizing the hazard. Praiselle proceeded anyway, placing crampons into brittle ice without proper technique. The additional stress caused the formation to fail. The collapse sent her sliding down the ridge. She fell hundreds of feet before dropping into a crevasse below. The impact caused catastrophic cervical spine trauma. Paralysis was immediate. Her oxygen cylinder, damaged in the fall, leaked rapidly, reducing available supply. At that elevation, survival after severe spinal injury is unlikely even with rapid rescue. Combined with hypoxia and extreme cold, her condition deteriorated quickly. Without full diaphragm function, breathing in thin air becomes unsustainable. Core temperature drops steadily, and organ systems begin to fail. Her Sherpa guide witnessed the fall, but could not safely descend into the crevasse due to unstable ice and continuing wind. Radio contact with base camp was delayed by interference. Helicopter evacuation was impossible at that altitude and in those wind conditions. Recovery attempts were deferred until the weather stabilized. Weeks later, during a scheduled cleanup rotation, her body was retrieved. The official findings listed cervical spine fracture and acute hypoxia as the primary causes of death. Equipment inspection confirmed that her oxygen system had been compromised during the fall. Among experienced climbers, the incident was viewed as preventable. Everest's upper mountain demands discipline, patience, and strict adherence to established routes. Attempting shortcuts in unstable conditions removes the narrow margin that keeps climbers alive. In the death zone, entitlement and overconfidence are not abstract flaws. They translate directly into exposure, instability, and irreversible consequence. It was October 8, 2017, on the north face of Mount Everest. Post-monsoon snow hid deep crevasses, and high winds weakened fragile snow bridges. Near the summit, one misstep could mean a fall into terrain impossible to escape. Bethany Rayod was 31, an heiress from Greenwich who financed a private Everest attempt after multiple commercial outfitters declined to accept her due to limited experience. Her previous climbs included guided ascents of Mount Washington and Mount Rainier, both serious mountains but far removed from Himalayan altitude and isolation. She publicly criticized established guiding companies, describing their caution as unnecessary. She insisted Everest was manageable with determination alone and announced plans to summit during the post-monsoon period, when most teams had already left. By October, the standard climbing season had ended. Government authorities had formally closed the mountain due to worsening weather. High-altitude winds strengthened, temperatures dropped sharply, and rescue infrastructure was dismantled. Despite this, Bethany secured permits through the informal channels and assembled a small support team. At base camp, her hired Sherpa staff urged patience, citing unstable snowpack and severe wind forecasts. She refused to delay. When they declined to proceed under those conditions, she replaced them with 2 porters who had no experience above base camp. The decision removed the last layer of experienced oversight. Satellite weather data showed sustained high winds near the summit. Snow bridges formed by drifting snow and temperature shifts were likely weakened internally, even if they appeared solid from above. The porters reported visible crevasse fields and uneven surface tension in the snowpack. Bethany dismissed the warnings as exaggeration. The summit objective had become personal proof that she could succeed where others would not attempt. Ascending the north face in unstable post-monsoon conditions demands careful probing of every step. Snow bridges can span deep crevasses, supported only by thin, wind-packed layers. Without methodical testing, collapse can occur without warning. Near the upper face, Bethany stepped onto what appeared to be a stable stretch of snow. Beneath it lay a concealed crevasse with vertical ice walls. The bridge failed instantly under combined body weight and gear load. She dropped into the void, falling until her rope caught against an ice ledge. The sudden arrest caused severe trauma. Both shoulders dislocated under the force, and her left femur fractured on impact. Suspended inside the crevasse, she was unable to reposition herself effectively. The confined space blocked much of her radio signal, and her injuries prevented her from operating communication devices reliably. At extreme altitude, immobility accelerates hypothermia. Blood flow to extremities decreases first, leading to rapid frostbite. As core temperature falls, cognitive function deteriorates. Disorientation and paradoxical undressing can occur in advanced hypothermia. Her porters, unable to navigate safely down to her position and lacking technical rescue equipment, retreated toward base camp to seek help. The descent required many hours over unstable terrain. By the time communication was established, wind conditions made any aerial rescue impossible. Ground rescue at that altitude, without a prepared team and stable weather window, was not feasible. When weather improved days later, a recovery team located her body within the crevasse. The official findings cited hypothermia as the primary cause of death, with multiple fractures contributing to immobility and rapid heat loss. Among experienced climbers, the incident was not viewed as an unpredictable accident. Post-monsoon Everest presents compounded risks. Unstable snowpack, minimal support infrastructure, and limited rescue capacity. Attempting a summit during a closed season without adequate experience removes critical safeguards. On Everest, especially outside the established climbing window, confidence cannot replace competence. Dismissing expert guidance and seasonal limits does not alter environmental reality. In high-altitude mountaineering, arrogance narrows the margin for survival until none remains. It was March 19, 2018, on the southeast ridge of Mount Everest. Early season conditions left the route partially prepared, with limited fixed ropes and shifting ladder crossings over crevasses in the moving Khumbu icefall. But on this mountain, the path can change daily, and what is safe today may fail tomorrow. Byrne, 26, a fitness influencer from Miami with a large online following, built around motivational training content. She had never climbed above moderate mountain altitude. Despite this, she publicly claimed physical conditioning mattered more than technical mountaineering experience. She dismissed acclimatization training as unnecessary and framed Everest as a challenge of willpower rather than environment. Her attitude toward the expedition was openly dismissive of safety warnings. Guides recommended delaying the ascent because early season routes were unstable. The Khumbu icefall is one of the most dangerous sections of Everest, where shifting glacier movement constantly creates new crevasses beneath thin snow bridges. Medical checks at the intermediate camp showed her oxygen saturation dropping to dangerously low levels. She ignored the readings, calling them equipment errors. Instead of resting, she continued climbing while live streaming to her audience, presenting fatigue and dizziness as signs of determination. Altitude sickness was already affecting her coordination. Above 26,000 feet, low oxygen levels can cause cerebral edema, which impairs judgment and balance. Speech may become slowed or confused, but she interpreted these symptoms as normal exhaustion Villain. Near the Hillary Step approach, Jamili attempted to cross a 3-ladder bridge, spanning a crevasse, roughly 150 feet across. The ladder system requires careful movement, with both hands free to maintain balance. However, she continued filming herself using a selfie stick, shifting weight while adjusting camera angles. Her safety rope caught after she slipped sideways off the ladder, but the sudden tension dropped her about 40 feet before stopping. The impact against the crevasse wall was violent. Internal injuries included ruptured spleen tissue, multiple rib fractures, and damage to the left lung. One fractured rib punctured the lung, causing internal bleeding. Suspended deep inside the crevasse, she could not reach her radio or emergency beacon because of shoulder and rib injuries. Blood gradually filled her chest cavity, restricting lung expansion. At high altitude, respiratory failure develops faster because the body cannot compensate for oxygen loss. Her live stream remained active through her device's automatic recording feature. Viewers later reported seeing her coughing blood onto the camera lens. Over approximately 20 minutes, oxygen saturation likely dropped to near fatal levels. Pulmonary edema from altitude sickness combined with lung trauma, accelerated suffocation. A climbing partner attempted to reach her position but could not descend safely due to unstable ice walls. Other viewers contacted emergency services after witnessing the live stream. However, helicopter rescue was impossible above 26,000 feet because of thin air density and severe wind turbulence. The expedition team waited for weather conditions to improve before attempting recovery. 2 days later, a Sherpa rescue group retrieved her body from the crevasse. The official medical report listed internal hemorrhaging and respiratory failure as primary causes of death, with altitude-induced pulmonary edema as a major contributing factor. If you're watching this far, consider subscribing and turning on notifications for more investigations into high-altitude tragedies. Her livestream footage was viewed by thousands before being removed from social media platforms. Sponsors who had supported her expedition quietly terminated their partnerships. Climbing organizations later discussed the incident as an example of how technical terrain, physiological limits, and overconfidence can combine into a fatal sequence. Within the mountaineering community, the tragedy reinforced a consistent lesson. Everest is not defeated by physical fitness alone. The mountain demands experience, patience, and respect for environmental risk. In the death zone, arrogance does not create advantage. It removes safety margins until survival becomes unlikely. It was May 3, 2013, on the south summit of Mount Everest. A sudden storm reduced visibility to near zero, bringing 70 miles per hour blizzard winds across the upper ridge. On Everest's highest slopes, weather can change from climbable to lethal within minutes. Victoria Camilo was 37, a corporate attorney from Manhattan with no technical mountaineering background beyond indoor climbing walls. After being rejected by multiple guiding companies for safety reasons, she pursued legal action until an outfitter agreed to accept her expedition booking. She approached the climb with a competitive mindset, treating the summit attempt like a professional victory. Public statements framed the expedition as a historic achievement goal, aiming to become the first lawyer to summit both Everest and Denali within the same year. The south summit lies just below Everest's true summit and is connected by a narrow, knife-edge ridge with extreme exposure on both sides. One side drops toward Tibet, the other faces the Kangshung Valley. The final ascent includes the Cornice Traverse, a section where wind-deposited snow forms unstable overhangs that can collapse without warning. Weather reports predicted a strong western storm arriving by midday, with wind speeds exceeding 60 miles per hour. The expedition leader recommended immediate descent from the south summit. Victoria refused, arguing she was only a short distance from the summit and would not be turned back by weather. She threatened legal action against the guiding company if forced to retreat. Her Sherpa guide declined to continue higher due to deteriorating conditions. Victoria proceeded alone, carrying reduced emergency equipment to preserve weight for summit photography. Her oxygen use was already elevated because of poor acclimatization, but she dismissed concerns, describing warning signs as normal fatigue. At the Cornice Traverse, she stepped onto a snow overhang extending beyond solid ground. The cornice showed visible stress fractures, indicating structural weakness beneath the surface. Experienced climbers Avoid such formations because internal collapse can occur without visible warning. The cornice gave way under her weight. She fell roughly 200 feet down the Kangshung face before her rope arrested the descent. The sudden stop generated forces exceeding 3,000 pounds, causing severe pelvic fracture and hip dislocation. The injuries would have been life-threatening even at sea level. She remained suspended on a steep ice slope in sub-zero temperatures with wind speeds near 70 miles per hour. Hypothermia began affecting her motor control, preventing her from operating communication equipment. Constant wind pressure slowly cut the climbing rope against the ice anchor. Over the next 3 hours, the rope fibers failed one layer at a time. Frostbite advanced across her extremities. High-altitude confusion worsened, and she removed her oxygen mask, accelerating oxygen deprivation. Eventually, the rope anchor failed completely, sending her into a deeper crevasse system where the final impact caused fatal trauma. Her Sherpa guide reported her missing several hours after she continued climbing alone. Storm intensity prevented any rescue operations for 2 days. Helicopter evacuation was impossible due to altitude limits and wind turbulence. Recovery teams located her body 3 weeks later during a commercial expedition survey. The coroner identified multiple traumatic injuries and severe hypothermia as primary causes of death. Evidence showed she survived the initial fall for several hours while suspended by the damaged rope. The incident received limited mention outside mountaineering records, appearing briefly in professional archives as an Everest climbing fatality involving an inexperienced solo attempt. Across these tragedies, a consistent pattern emerged. Wealth and confidence were repeatedly mistaken for technical competence. Expert warnings were treated as obstacles rather than guidance. On Everest, determination alone cannot replace preparation. The mountain does not respond to ambition, legal pressure, or social validation. In the death zone, human willpower has a biological limit. When preparation is replaced by arrogance, the mountain requires only a single, unstable step. Thanks for watching. If you like these stories, click here.